Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who are partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The word of the Lord. So most of you know that I have children who were in competitive swimming while they were in high school. But what you might not know is that love of all things water is not an inherited trait, at least not from my side of the gene pool. I was the kid who took beginner's swimming lessons 3 times. Screaming, crying, lots of anxiety on my part and my parents' part, and many bribes accompanied me each time I went into the pool. I did eventually pass the class, and even went on to pass advanced and intermediate swimming. But I must admit, I never really learned to enjoy it. While most kids were really excited when we finally got to go into the deep water and truck down to the deep end of the pool and retrieve those little rings off the bottom, I was terrified. It was all I could do to swim hard enough to grab that green ring and make it back to the top of the surface. I thought I was going to die. And while my peers heard the words "deep end" and associated them with accomplishment, those words never had a positive correlation in my mind. To this day, I hear the words "deep end" and I want to run. What's wrong with just wanting to float in the shallow end where I can touch? When my swim teacher finally told my parents that I could swim well enough, I left swimming lessons and I never went back. But swimming was not my profession, thank God. And I didn't leave right after I had the best swim of my lifetime. The fishermen in our gospel reading this morning pull in the best catch of their lifetime, and then they leave it all behind. Imagine having the most productive day of your entire professional career, and then instead of relishing in your achievement and taking notes on how you might be that successful again, you just walk away from all of it. This week in Breakfast Bible Study, someone commented that they couldn't believe that someone didn't approach Jesus immediately after this and say, "I think you'd make a great addition to our fishing team. Let's see what we can do about getting you a job here." But they didn't. They just left it all behind. Or did they? One of the things that I love about this passage is that it keeps us, or keeps me at least, asking lots of questions. It's like the questions are built into the narrative. I want to ask, why did Jesus need to teach from a boat anyway? And why are we not told anything about what he taught while he was in that boat? And why would seasoned fishermen who were worn out and disappointed because their lack of a catch, despite working all night, do what Jesus, a carpenter, told them to do, when everything in them was probably telling them it was time to just go home? Then I have all these questions about Simon, too. I mean, how well did Simon know Jesus at this point? What made him willing to listen to Jesus and to do what Jesus said? And was the teaching just a little way from the shore, all just really a way to bait Simon so that he would go out into the deep water? And what was Simon thinking when he decided to go out into the deep water? Was he thinking, I'll just go ahead and do this and get it over with so we can all go home? Or he'll see soon enough the fish just aren't biting? Or was he thinking, maybe this guy knows something I don't, and well, I still have to pay my taxes and my people are hungry, so what have I got to lose? And why is Simon's response to this miracle of abundance one of fear and not celebration? And, well, I could go on and on with all of my questions about this passage, but you probably wouldn't be very happy with me if I did. So I'm going to try and reel it in a little bit from here. Thank you. Jesus hopped into Simon's boat and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. And Simon humored him, just like you humored me. Then Jesus takes it a step further, telling Simon to go out into the deep water and let their nets down again. The nets they had just finished cleaning, by the way, which was a long and arduous process. Now, these fishermen had fished all night long, and they caught nothing, nada, zilch. It was morning, and their nets were already cleaned. They most likely wanted to go home and get some rest before they were going to go out again the next night. This is the context in which Jesus tells Simon to put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon's polite and all, but he doesn't just say, okay. He puts up a little protest, gives a little bit of an excuse. Master, we have worked all night long, but we have caught nothing. Perhaps he was thinking to himself, really? You think we don't know what we're doing? We are fishermen, after all. We do this for a living. The fish aren't biting. But he thinks better of it and responds, yet if you say so, I will let down the nets. Maybe Simon felt indebted to Jesus. Jesus did just heal Simon's mother-in-law. Maybe she watched the kids or something while he was out on a fishing trip. Or maybe he and Simon had a really close friendship. We know from the chapter just prior to this one that Jesus stayed at his house. Or maybe Simon was just that kind of a guy, the kind that would do anything for anyone if they just asked. Whatever the reason, he sucks it up and goes out into the deep water. But failure looms large in the background of this story. The fishermen have failed to catch fish. And not for their lack of trying. The author of this gospel is very careful to tell us that they have worked hard. They have stayed up all night long. They have thrown the nets on one side and then the other over and over and over again, hoping to find just a few fish caught up in their nets. But they still had to go home empty-handed. They have nothing to show for all of their hard work. Nothing to sell, nothing to eat, nothing to share. Now, I might understand this story better if this were the point which the fishermen decided that they were going to leave everything behind and do something different with their lives. No one could fault them if they did. This fishing thing just wasn't seem to work anymore. They had tried their best. But just when they're ready to hang it up and admit defeat, at least for the night, Jesus hops into the boat. And he asks them to do something so easy, so doable, they don't even think twice about it. Let's move out just a little bit from the shore. You don't have to do anything. You can just sit there and listen. I'll do the teaching from there. And that's what Jesus did. He just sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep waters and let down your nets for a catch." Now Jesus was asking a lot. Now he wants them to return to their place of failure, return to the place of disappointment. He knows that the fishermen tried everything. He knows that they were ready to give up and go home. He knows that their hard work amounted to nothing but empty nets. And they have obliged him thus far. But now Jesus wants to lead them back into the deep water where they failed. Back into the same old deep water from which they just returned. Notice that Jesus doesn't say here, "Hey, I've got this great new fishing spot to show you, and I bet we can catch some fish there." He doesn't give them magic nets or special bait, and he doesn't try to explain to them how they might have been doing it wrong the first time, and if they make a few tweaks, he's sure they'll catch some fish this time. And he doesn't stand on the shore and bark orders at them from afar. He's already in the boat with them. And then Jesus just goes about his own business, doing what he always does, picking up and teaching. As if last week's debacle in his hometown, when he taught them and they tried to throw him off a cliff, never even happened. Jesus just picks up where he left off. And now he's asking Simon and the rest of the fishermen to do the same. He's given them a little bit of distance from their failure. And now he's ready to show them the abundance of life that swims just beneath the surface of the water. Their faith has been rocked, but Jesus' faith in them has not. He knows that they are fishermen after all, that they know how to catch these fish. They know from years of experience and hard work what it takes to be good fishermen. Patience, respect for the elements of nature, resilience, the importance of timing and humility, the value of teamwork, an awareness of their own limitations, and the need to tend and mend their nets. When Jesus tells them to go with him into the deep water, he's not asking them to be anyone other than who they already are. He's telling them to bring all of who they are to this vocation to which he's now calling them. Jesus doesn't take a fish out of water and expect it to be able to live. And in just the same way, he doesn't take a fisherman away from his vocation and expect him to be able to catch people. He calls them not so that they will leave their nets and never fish again. Jesus knows all too well the value of empty nets. And he calls the tired and disappointed fishermen to follow him and go out with him to the deep water because he knows they are uniquely qualified for the work of catching people. Through Jesus, we learn that God values all of who we are, our skills, our culture, our trades, our education, our experience, and even our failures, and can cultivate them so that the daily stuff of our lives may be multiplied for God's own purposes. And all of this leads to our amazement. The author of this gospel tells us that Simon Peter and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken. Amazed. Amazed because they caught so many fish. Amazed that all of these fish were there all along. All the whole time that they were pulling up nothing but empty nets. Amazed because God's presence can fill us with such an abundance, so much that we must work together to pull it in, so much that we have no choice but to share it with others, so much that we can be confident in leaving behind everything we're accustomed to being and doing and go with Jesus to the deep waters. Not because we're confident in our own abilities or have super amounts of faith in ourselves, but because we realize God has faith in us. Thank you for bearing with me in this deep water. Amen.